Hello, Garland Nixon here, hanging out with, and I'm going to show my age, the neck, my Sharona, but we go with Mark Sleboda. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here, hanging out with Mark Sleboda. And Mark, now you can find him. Wait a minute, is it Boosty? That's right. Let me show you this. This is critical. This is important. If you don't remember anything else from this video, remember this. Boosty.to. That's BOOSTY.to / The Real Politique. That's where you can find the fine works of Mark Sleboda. You see all that stuff there? There you go. You want to know what he's up to, who he's talking to, all the good stuff, all Mark Sleboda style stuff. We got 102 subscribers, so we need more people to go there, become subscribers. This is sanction proof. So if you're really excited about being able to help Mark Sleboda and to work with him and follow everything he's doing, that's boosty.to, The Real Politique. Follow Mark Sleboda. All right. Let's start here, Mark Sleboda. Shockingly.
Thank you for the shameless shill.
Yeah. Hey, man, that really is good stuff. I really do follow your work. I'm just saying this. I believe that alternative media is critical, that it is a critical part of not just the media per se, but international politics. I believe that international players are starting to are starting to react to it. Iran had a big thing in Tehran a few months back where they had lots of people. I couldn't make it, unfortunately. I was invited, but everybody was there. A lot of stuff has come out from that. We've seen people meeting with Sergei Lavrov, intervening. But this is important stuff that we're doing. I believe, I used to think we were just, beating our heads against the wall, but I've come to believe that this is really important. So let's get going. The Empire of Lies speech. Everybody should go look that back up. That was Vladimir Putin. Very, very salient today as the Washington Post reveals the treachery of empire. Mark Sleboda, what's up with this latest Washington Post article?
Well, I will also remind us of our previous first Secretary of State and then CIA Director, then Secretary of State under the first Trump administration, Mike Pompeo, who said, we lie, we cheat, we steal. What was there?
We have classes on it. We have classes on it. Remember that? I think that's what he said.
Yeah. There's an interesting story out in the Washington Post. Actually, I would say there was two interesting stories in the past week. The first one of them was a leaked phone call conducted by Israeli intelligence, one of many, part of a campaign to an Iranian general. On just before Iran launched their attack, demanding that he flee the country and also make a video condemning his own government, or they would kill him, his wife, and his child. And they knew where they were, and let spill some details about that to demonstrate that they did know. This is how Israeli intelligence achieved this type of damaging penetration that they did during the first hours and days of their attack. This is also, by the way, how the Syrian government fell, right? Through a combination of threats and blackmail and bribes and co-option, whatever they decide is tailored to the individual that will work best. This is what Western intelligence agencies do. And what's, I think, more interesting, the Washington Post reporting this, there's not the slightest hint in that Washington Post article that what they're describing is in any way wrong.
Oh,
They threatened to kill the man's wife and child. And the Washington Post in no way is critical of this. Is it in no way identifying this as terrorism, as a war crime? Nothing like that. Just, it's okay when we do it because we're the good guys. That's the modus operandi. So
remember
that
John
was
Bolton? Remember when Bolton did that to I think it was a Brazilian guy, and he said, we know where your children are. They're going to school in New York. So
yeah,
this
that
is
was that was the International Atomic Energy Agency head at the time during the first Trump administration as well. Yes. So, I mean, this is their modus operandi. And this is the type of thing that they usually present as, the kind of things that the evil terrorist regime in Iran does. Well, hey, actually, it's our allies, Israel. And of course, the U.S. is as well versed in exactly the same thing. So there was a second Washington Post article that I think is interesting out there. This came out two days ago, June 23rd, 3 days ago already. Netanyahu decided on Iran war last year, then sought to recruit Trump once he was elected. So the Israeli prime minister had set in motion his plan to attack Iran long before President Trump began efforts to resolve nuclear concerns through negotiations. This is an interesting article. Let's take it with a grain of salt. But senior Israeli officials say they had already decided, right? Like they by March to attack Iran, and it had, even though they had assessed that Iran had the U.S. had assessed Iran had no nuclear weapons program, and the reason had nothing to do with some evidence about some groundbreaking nuclear. It was the idea that Iran would have rebuilt its air defenses by the latter half of the year. And they had worked hard to, well, one, the skies over Syria were clear, and Hezbollah and Hamas and the Ansar Allah movement, the Houthis in Yemen, had all been weakened by attacks, and they sensed a window of opportunity, basically. So that there was no last minute decision. There was no new evidence. This was started to be planned over a year ago, and the firm plans came in back in March before Trump had even begun his pantomime negotiations with Iran.
so. Look, what we see ultimately is it's all lies. It's all lies. The truth is, the U.S., and I've said this for years, the ruling elite can't possibly tell the American people what the true nature of their foreign policy is, because the American people would say, my God, you're destroying us for that. That sounds like something crazy from a cartoon evil guy in a, superhero movie. You're the
Are we the baddies?
Yeah, exactly. You got to ask. The answer's already there. So yeah, of course. And so that goes. Let's do that, and let's run with your thoughts. I mean, on the Iran conflict and where we are. Clearly, as we know, we've been over the history, but Iran had some as the Chinese said, they had a weak shield and a strong spear, right? They had seriously air defense issues, which didn't have to happen, but it happened. They were able to punch the living daylights out of Israel. So sometimes the best defense is a good offense. But your thoughts on, of course, then the Iranians went to Russia. I don't know. I would imagine if I were the Iranians, I'd ask for help, both in air defense and, importantly, maybe even more, at least equally importantly, I need help with intel because my intelligence is weak, and the Russians are good at that. And the Chinese sent a couple of intel collecting ships, I suspect. But at any rate, your thoughts on where we are now, those issues.
Yeah. So, I mean, we had this absolutely insane and schizophrenic, frenetic slew of social media posts by Trump. right? Over the last week plus, right? On one day we had there will be no ceasefire. There will be only total. We will have total victory over Iran and a demand for their unconditional surrender. And then a few days later, Trump is demanding a ceasefire and dictating the terms of it, right? One day we have, regime change in Iran. Yeah, I said we shouldn't do regime change anymore, but make Iran great again, right? Regime change. And then it wasn't even 48 hours later, Trump turns around and says, oh, we don't want Iran, regime change in Iran. That would be chaos. Who needs that? It's just absolutely amazing. Trump, he's still maintaining the air of this trash reality TV show host that he was, right? He's constantly saying and doing everything to an audience. Everything is to an audience. Whereas Joe Biden never spoke to the media or to the people at all, or Joe Biden's corpse never did.
No.
And, I mean, that's pretty understandable why. But we get the exact opposite from Trump. And it's very interesting to me. I imagine, psychologists will be looking at this years into the future. How much is actually calculated deception, and how much of it is emotional outburst? How much is madman theory, and how much is madman?
Right.
Because the schizophrenia inherent in this, it's absolutely. I mean, he goes 180 degrees on a dime, right? In within hours of each other. It makes our job as analysts, journalists, very, very hard. I can only imagine what foreign governments trying to decide what the hell the US is doing make of all of this, right? There's nothing been like it before. He not only speaks to his own people, but he speaks to other countries, right? To their leadership, to their people. He conducts diplomacy by childish, puerile, theatrical, screaming capital letters social media posts, and not like intelligent ones. I mean, like something that somebody's 13 or 4-year-old kid that shouldn't be commenting on the grown-up threads, is like. And we had all of this in coming into the close of the Iran conflict, or I should rather say the pause, because I don't believe that we're actually
Sure.
at a close. We had word in the Western media in the last few days before Trump bombed Iran and then declared peace and it was all over. He said no more hate. And then in the last 24 hours, after that, he then releases a video of like a song, a parody song, "Bomb, Bomb, 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 Bomb Iran," ode to John McCain, I guess, talking about putting the Ayatollah Khamenei in a box. And this was, to the tune of the Beach Boys' Barbara Ann, right? Again, ode to John McCain. So no more hate, and then this. The man, is he mad? I know I talked about him as a chaos bomb for months, but this is beyond. This is really hard. I think what became clear is that there was some point over this last weekend where he began to realize that Israel was in a bad way. That they were running out of air defense, that they were running out of offensive munitions, and Iran looked like they had recovered from the initial, largely, asymmetric warfare, unconventional warfare, Mossad attacks that had done I think by far the more real considerable damage, that they had put their stuff together and began to settle in for a long-term, long-range strike war of attrition, something that Israel obviously was not prepared for. They didn't have the air defense missiles. Their air defense screen to begin with was, only partially effective. The United States simply does not have the air defense assets to give them, right, to protect Israel and U.S. military bases in the region from what was apparently large stocks of Iranian ballistic and cruise missiles and supposedly some hypersonic missiles that were fully capable of penetrating Israel's vaunted David's boomerang. No, I'm sorry, David's sling. Some people are calling it boomerang because there were several incidences where it fired back on itself during the conflict. So they realized that their regime change plans were not working out as some people had promised, that the Iranian government, while battered, right, and suffering, significant decapitation damage, particularly to the IRGC leadership and to their civilian nuclear scientists, but that they had more domestic support, and there was largely a rally around the flag effect going on in the country. So that halted the regime change attempts. What's more, it seems that after the first 48 hours, they began to regain control of their air defense to some degree. Not well, but better than it was at the beginning, supposedly due to a cyber attack. And there was also the internal drone attacks that struck a lot of locations. But the U.S. realized that Israel was starting to get, pounded. I mean, not that they weren't handing out equal, but this was like two, mid-weight boxers with no defense whatsoever, just wailing on each other. And it looked like, while Israel got some initial good blows in the beginning, that the tide would inevitably turn in Iran's direction, right? Because Israel did not have the stocks of air defense to continue up. And there was incredible psychological damage being done to Israeli society simply because they had been told that their air defense, the Iron Dome, David's arrow, David's sling was some kind of magic force field that could stop anything in it. That wasn't true. I mean, they were making interceptions, but when Iran was using their modern ballistic missiles and hypersonic, there was more getting through than was intercepted. And I think that's pretty clear.
Mark, if I may, I think it was a humiliation for the entire Western air defense, because I was watching this thing the other day and they showed that when the planes are first fired, you've got American and British and Italian warships in the Persian Gulf trying to intercept them. Then they go over then they go over the American bases in Iraq and their air defenses. Then they go over and so they literally hit 4 air defense segments before they got to the Iron Dome and David's sling and all that stuff, and they still hit. So it just showed these air defense that people were like, well, the Israelis didn't do good. They only got about 50%. Yeah, but that 50% includes 4 other. In other words, if it were just Israel's air defenses, they were a sieve. They would literally be a sieve. If it was just their air defenses, they were naked, basically.
Yeah, and you're right. That was with U.S. and British and Jordanian and other Middle East countries that are trying to keep quiet about it help as well. So I think one real takeaway from all of this is that the only country that we know of with real multi-layered, interconnected, integrated air defense and electronic network is Russia.
Well, you know what? Here's the other thing I thought about. Okay, if you talk about air defense here's what I would say. We already know Russia's air defense is effective because we've seen it in combat. So we can say, based on real combat situations, it's tried and true and it's tested
Against
and there have been a lot of.
modern Western weapons, right?
Yep. Yep. Now we look at, if you look at Iran and you can say, well, Iran's air defense system had some issues. But if they had a full Russian air defense system, it would have been very
Which
effective.
they
But
had
they're
refused.
right.
Russia had offered that to them, and they
So
had refused.
so now what we see is this. Had this actually been a Russian air defense system versus a NATO air defense system, which would be the case if Russia and NATO were going in, NATO's naked they're naked against anybody. First of all, Iran was using some of their old missiles. You saw some of these missiles and you see like a light in the sky. I'm like, is that a star? Oh, wait, it's moving very slowly. And it's not like hypersonic. And slowly you see 3 or 4 very slow missiles ambling across the star and they're slowly coming down. Wham! And I'm like, you couldn't stop those missiles? I could have hit them with a rock.
Yeah, they were using a mixture of older and newer missiles in order to saturate the air defense and make them waste assets trying to bring down older systems, right? Which is something that both sides, by the way, are doing in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. They're using older missiles. They're using fake drones, the Gerbera, all sorts of this is happening both sides all the time. And doubtless, to some degree, this was going on both sides as well. So it's interesting, but yeah, both sides had major air defense problems, and it was quite obvious that Iran wanted to tap out. That they indicated days before Trump entered and bombed and then declared the ceasefire. There was the reports in the Western press that Israel was trying to contact Iran and ask for a ceasefire. Because they just weren't prepared to go the distance. They had hoped that Iran would collapse immediately, and that didn't happen. For whatever reason they believed that, I'm not quite sure. But Iran, on the other hand, and the U.S. pushed this through because, of course, they didn't want their baby, Israel, being mauled further than they were. And Iran, I mean, they had been hurt badly enough in the beginning. They had suffered, significant. Again, I think most of the real damage was more this terrorism and assassinations and other things. Which, again, there's no question when Israel does it and assassinates scientists and their families and it takes out entire buildings full of people. That's okay because that's our side. I mean, that's the way the Western media. There is zero criticality of all of these assassanations, most of them against civilians whatsoever.
And no, the Iranians hit a hospital. They hit a hospital. Oh, that was terrible. There was a blast in the area and it broke some windows and knocked some plasters off the wall in an Israeli hospital.
Children in Palestine passed away when an explosion occurred in a medical facility.
Exactly.
That's the way the Western media, rather than Israel bombed the hospital and killed children, right? I mean, that's the way the Western mainstream media will go out of their way. One of the things, young adults, that was people younger than adult age. It's just absolutely very weird rhetorical and semantic games to avoid saying what Israel has been doing in Gaza and Iran and elsewhere. It is morally bankrupt, just absolutely moral. They posture and pretend that they are morally superior, but of course they are the baddies. They are the moral bankrupt side. But Iran had taken enough damage, and doubtless through contacts they had made with Russia and China told them, taking the opportunity to de-escalation. They're like, we can prepare you better for round 2. Yeah. If you'll trust us, right? I mean, if you get over whatever it was, that led you to say no to this months ago. Take whatever opportunity. And Iran did. But to be fair, Iran had been saying from the beginning, officially, that if Israel stops its aggression, they will stop retaliating.
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
They made that clear from the beginning. And I know a lot of people, perhaps reacting too emotionally, seem upset about this. They thought Iran should have pounded Tel Aviv more. There was a certain schadenfreude to seeing it. They should have destroyed Israel. They should have saved the people of Gaza. I mean, that's just
Not realistic.
be
It's not
realistic.
realistic.
That is
Well,
beyond
yeah.
the means of anyone, and beyond certainly Iran. So they
And
survived.
the other thing is this: they were in a good position because everybody, most of the civilized world all recognized an illegal war of aggression against them. So they had the moral high ground. They had pounded Israel, and let's face it, even if they go blow for blow, they're 78 times bigger than Israel. They're always going to win that one, right? So they had the moral high ground. They were getting in shots on their enemy who picked the fight with them that they didn't want, and they could legitimately claim victory. They could say, hey, they attacked us, we regained, we punched a hat, look at that, there's pictures everywhere, and the people at home had rallied around the flag. So just strategically speaking, it was perfect for them, a good time for them to tap out, to get some help, to rebuild some things. The people at Israel, in Iran, were all like, we may have been a little pissed at the government for here and there, but come to think of it, we're all coming together against these bastards. I think it was perfect timing. And now that they got their nose snubbed a little bit, and I'm sure Putin gave them a little I told you so, but now they can say we need some help with some intelligence to deal with these maggots, and we need some air defense help, and everybody can kind of regroup, shall we say. Perfect time for regrouping without it going too far. You didn't want it to go too far. It could really hurt a lot of people's economies, including Russia. Everybody could get hurt economically really bad.
Even so, Iran had to look at it this way. One, they thought if they were forced to, they could win a long-term war of attrition with long-range strikes against Iran, right? But if the U.S. entered it full scale, that becomes a lot less clear, right?
Exactly.
There was no need to do that. On top of that, even without the U.S. entering, let's be honest, Israel has escalation dominance, because if they ever feel threatened enough, they'll just let loose the nukes. And then, the rest of the world already hates them outside the West, so it's not like they have that much more to lose in that regard. So, Israel, I think played it, or Iran played it safe here in agreeing to it.
Yeah.
Everyone, all three, right? Trump, Netanyahu, and the Ayatollah Khamenei. Now, they're all trying to play the narrative game of declaring victory, right? Trump is declaring the most obliteratedness. Nothing has ever been so obliterated in the history of obliterations as the U.S. bombings of Fort Dow and Estefan, these nuclear facilities. Meanwhile, the Western mainstream media is quietly admitting that actually they evacuated everything from those places. They had gotten dispersed all the enriched uranium. They had even gotten out most of their advanced centrifuges and the like. And on top of it, the damage we did is really not looking like it even in obliterated terms, destroyed, already evacuated facilities. So Trump is trying to, he's comparing it to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, for fuck's sake. He's mad. But he's also absolutely going off insane on anyone in the Western media who dares challenge that the emperor has no clothes, right? That this wasn't a complete obliteration, right? They're unpatriotic. They're attacking our military. I mean, just absolutely insane stuff. The Western mainstream media is obviously expected to just go along with the fiction he's creating so that the US can declare victory. Kind of like what they did with Yemen, right? And walk away for the time being while reserving the right to just bomb Iran in the future whenever they feel like it. Because evidently, according to Trump, that's not a war. That's just pruning.
But didn't he also say Iran they fought bravely and they're smart and we'll do business with them in the future? I mean, you're like,
and then he said bomb, 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 bomb Iran, right? I mean, he's I mean, the last president had dementia, and this president, he's got a screw loose. I mean, he's seriously unhinged.
He really is. Yeah.
Another thing that he appeared really upset about, that if we try to read between the lines of the tweets while all of this was happening, was at one point he was yelling about drill, baby, drill, and then screaming about the rising price of oil, right? I'm watching you. Who's he watching? I don't even know. The market? I mean,
he was scared. He was scared of that Straits of Hormuz stuff.
He was scared. He's like, you're playing
alarmed
into the hands of the enemy. So Iran had threatened, I mean, this was their nuclear option, to close the Straits of Hormuz, right? Through which the majority, to mine it. They also talked about GPS jamming, lots of things, right? Lots
Sinking
of things.
Ships in it, everything.
And there was talk of the Iranian parliament had actually passed a resolution saying that this should be done. That it would then have to go to the Guardian Council and the president and so forth. But I think Trump started to get worried about that because how sensitive U.S. domestic economy and politics is to rising price at the gasoline pump. So I think that was also part of his calculus that saw him flip from screaming from regime change and surrender, total capitulation to ceasefire. I mean, I think that was a big part of whatever.
Do you think to add to that? Do you think, because I was watching online, there was some MAGA issues. There were some people in MAGA who were starting to show. Do you think that really anything to do with it either?
Not really. He doesn't have to run for election again.
Yeah, good point.
No matter what, he actually really had broad. I mean, there was a little bit of partisan sniping, but most of the power players in the Senate on both sides, there was broad bipartisan support for this, right?
Always.
There was a few outliers. So if Marjorie Taylor Greene and Thomas Massie were yelling, yeah, it's annoying to him, right? So he's said that CNN reporters who reported the truth that these facilities weren't completely destroyed should be fired. And he wants Thomas Massie chased out of office for questioning all of this. But I think that was more an annoyance than a serious threat to him. But that's my. I'm out of the U.S. for 20 years. I'm just very cynical that Americans, at the end of the day, unless they are directly, demonstrably, seriously affected in the pocketbooks, that they really, the majority, all of you out there who are watching this, you care far more about foreign policy than the average people, right? That's why you're watching this show. But most Americans don't. That's not what they vote on. It's never in their top issues when they make a vote for a president, for a leader, anything like this. And I saw far too many MAGA, supposedly America First people that were jumping on the Israel First bandwagon. I mean, fairly, shall we say, MAGA influencers of note and importance. So I'm skeptical that maybe it factored in a little bit, but ultimately I don't think that was anywhere near as decisive as the threat of oil prices jumping sky high, which has serious deleterious effects all across the board on the U.S. economy, because that's how they do distribution and transportation, is trucks, right? Not trains, not anything else. So that's difficult. So all of this factored in, to whatever made him flip on a dime, apparently overnight, between regime change and then demanding a ceasefire, declaring victory and peace, walking away. And but he's also set a precedent, right? He's still reserving the right to just bomb Iran to go after their civilian nuclear program. And what all of this has done, right? I would say that definitely the US and Israel did not win, right? They got some good
Right.
hits
Yeah.
in, but they did not win. Um, when it comes to Iran, they got hurt, but they survived. The goal was regime change. The other goal was wiping out their their civilian nuclear enrichment program, and I think it's pretty clear that didn't happen either. So, and it was the U.S. and Israel who pushed for the ceasefire. On all three of those scores, that tells me that no matter how bad they got it in the initial days, that Iran finished ahead on points.
Yeah.
Maybe only slightly, but they finished ahead, right? I think that's pretty clear. And coming out of this, they will have nothing to do with the International Atomic Energy Agency, which was obviously institutionally captured by the West and weaponized, and they have zero credibility and trust, and they will. So now Iran's nuclear program is without any official oversight. Yes, intelligence, but also Trump just bombed all over the nuclear non-proliferation treaty.
Yes, he
right?
did.
That treaty, part of the deal was, okay, you don't build nuclear weapons, all the signatories, but then you have the right to a civilian nuclear program. And Trump and Israel were saying, no, you could have no nuclear enrichment. Iran doesn't get that because we say so. So what is the rest of the world? The rest of the world is going to look what just happened to Iran and what happened to Libya and what happened to Iraq before that. And they're going to glance over and see Kim Jong-un sitting there in North Korea with a strategic nuclear deterrent, with strategic partnerships and mutual defense treaties with Russia and China, out of economic isolation, sitting pretty. And the one thing everyone is going to say, they're going to say, one, we got to get us some of those nukes as deterrent against the U.S., and two, we got to get some of alliance with Russia and China as against that. That is what's going to come out of this. So I think the biggest losers of this conflict, right, other than Donald Trump's lies, are the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, international law, and the credibility of the International Atomic Energy Agency. They're the big losers. I'm afraid that the end result of this, that was ostensibly done out of fears of nuclear proliferation, is going to result in exactly the opposite. We're going to see multiple countries probably looking into developing nuclear programs now.
Well, let me ask you this, Mark. The Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, all this stuff going on, right? And then the nuclear power plant in Kursk and all that. The Russians had contact with the IAEA. They had people there. Come on in, take a look. Well, the pictures will show you what we're doing, blah, blah, blah. Now, in light of the fact that we now know the IAEA comes in, they look around your house and they say, "Ooh, Mark has a flat screen TV." And then they go back and tell the criminals, "Hey, Mark's got a flat screen TV," so they can break in later and steal it, right? Why the hell would I ever invite these bastards in my house? If they say, "Hey, Russia, we'd love to come look at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant," you say, "If you think I'm letting you people in the door, you got another of your spies. You're going to go back. You're going to take pictures. You're going to plant things. You're effectively MI6, CIA, Mossad spies. I don't want you anybody. You put me in charge of Russia. There ain't nobody related to the IAEA that will be allowed to get through customs and put one stinking foot in my country."
Iran knew the International Atomic Energy Agency was just feeding information to Israel and the U.S. for strikes all the time. But because they didn't actually have a weapons program, they believed they were safe, foolishly, naively, right? That well, if we are transparent and they are spying on us and feeding information, then at least they'll see that we're really not doing anything. But at the end of the day, that was only a pretext, right? So it didn't help them in the slightest. And I don't know. At
Remember the
least
OSCE?
publicly,
Remember the OSCE?
yeah, yeah. Well,
They were doing the same thing. They
they
were
were
supposed
supposed
to
to
be
monitor artillery fire,
right,
yeah.
and they were targeting the Russians.
On bus, yes, they were. They were. It's institutional capture. I mean, it's a real thing. Um, it's a fault that happens, at the United Nations. I mean, at various times, the U.S. has accused, other UN bodies of being institutionally captured against them. Right? They accuse the General Assembly of voting against Iran all the time, which is very true. But that's just the opinion of the world, right? So it's difficult, and the UN has a lot of warts, but I think people generally expect too much out of the United Nations as a whole. The primary goal of the United Nations and the UN Security Council is to prevent nuclear war between nuclear powers, and we've come close on multiple occasions, including recently, but as of yet, it's at least past its minimum, level of what it's supposed to do because we're all still here. So,
Let me.
I feel the United Nations has a lot of problems, both in institutional capture and institutional paralysis and incompetence, but it's still the best we got. Even if international law is only a figment agreed upon when it's convenient for all the great powers, it's still better than nothing. If it's actually used for debate and discussing things rather than bombing, obviously the Trump administration has never cared about the United Nations one bit. There wasn't even an attempt to take this. Say what you will, at least during the Russia went to the UN Security Council with Ukraine, and George H.W. Bush went to the UN Security Council about the first Gulf War. Right, these things they did the thing where the UN Security Council was supposed to decide matters of the use of military force, and at least they tried to present their case there. Now there's not even an attempt to go through those motions, of course, with the Trump administration, or it must be said with the previous Biden administration, or with the Obama administration before that. And when that is, the hyperpower, the hegemon, well, the fading hyperpower now, no longer a hyperpower, but still maybe first among great powers, that's a problem because that means that international law is completely hollowed out and means nothing. But even that figment, at least sometimes it's agreed upon as a figment, and that's better than nothing. So I have mixed feelings about that. I'm more than willing to criticize it, but when people say that the United Nations should just be gone, or that also is not the answer.
I also think that some of the great powers of the world figured this. Okay, as the the empire starts to crumble, that they will more and more ignore any manner of law or order in the world. They'll get worse and worse and worse to the point where they are now. But after, if we're able to get over the top here and they kind of at some point end up having to accept, okay, we ain't running everything anymore, that there'll be a chance then that in fact they may run to the you know what I mean, after all of that, they may have to run to the UN to bail them out of some of the disasters. Okay. So once we get over that, I think there's opportunity, and I think it is wise to continue to try to maintain this. Now, at the same time, this absurd farce is going on in The Hague, of all interesting places, a good place for most of those leaders to be. They should all be at The Hague, might I add. But Luhansk has fallen. And the Russians just keep on plodding along, knocking off town after town. Your thoughts on either or both of those things. One being a debacle and the other being maintain course and speed.
Okay, so on the first, I would correct your pronunciation because we now agree that Lugansk is now 100%. There was one tiny little partial of a forest in one settlement that had lingered in Kiev regime's hand for a while. Now it's completely been liberated by Russia. We should call it by the proper Russian pronunciation, which is Lugansk,
Yes.
not Hansk, which is Kiev regime speak.
Okay. So.
Anyway, yeah. So I mean that's significant, and Russia generally is maintaining the pressure. It has to be said, it has to be noted, to be fair, that the Kiev regime over the last week has launched an attempt at counterattacks in the Sumy region and at several other locations. This is very similar to previous counterattacks we've seen in the last half a year, including a few months ago once the Russian forces had taken Toretsk, and then there was an attempt to push back in. Inevitably, these counterattacks are timed politically, right? There's a big NATO meeting. We got to pretend like we can still fight on the battlefield and do something. And then they surge forward for a day or two before they're completely exhausted. And then Russians push them back. And then they advance faster because they exhausted themselves when they would have been much better reserving what they had left for defensive purposes because it's easier. There was a post by a Kiev regime military commander, one of the Banderites, in the last just the 24 hours, talking about how the majority of troops now on the front lines, including those being sent on assaults like counterattacks, are bussified, meaning that they are forcibly conscripted, that there are very few volunteers, i.e. Banderite ideologicals, left at this point. And if the forcibly conscripted do fight, and they have an enormous problem with desertions, right? Some 100,000 already this year, just this year, deserted. But if they do fight, if you can convince them to throw their lives away for this regime, they do a much better job defending a trench than conducting an assault on the opponent, which is much more complicated military activity. So wasting what forces you have left in political offensive gestures like this is just militarily, tactically, strategically dumb, right? But the Kiev regime has always gone for the political angle, the narrative war, more than they fought the real war, and this is just another case. But by and large, Russia still has the initiative once this has they've gotten this out of the system in the next, I would predict, day or two, and then Russian forces in Sumy, in the Konstantinovka area, in around Seversk, even now in the outskirts of Pokrovsk, will surge. Will push ahead faster. Then it's openly admitted they have nothing. They're out of manpower. They're out of artillery. They're even running out of drones at this point. Which is something that they had tried to pretend that they were ahead of in for a long time. They just have nothing at this point. And the Washington Post further broke another interesting story in the Washington Post, another admission of reality this week, that the Kiev regime is teetering on the edge of economic collapse as well as the military collapse. And when the Washington Post admits that, things are bad. So things are not looking good for those still cheerleading for the Kiev regime across the board. On the other hand, Zelensky showed up to the NATO summit in The Hague, not quite in a suit, but at least in a jacket, black shirt and jacket. which I guess was some type of attempt to please Trump. I'm not so sure it worked. Whatever else Trump may do or not do as the leader of the United States, as the leader of the hegemon, there's really no question that he has nothing but personal contempt for Zelensky.
Yeah.
I doubt that this seriously improved that.
It seems to me that they're also probably starting to get towards the business end of all of the Biden arms that was sent. They still got some stuff coming in. That's not coming like it used to. Certainly, the Israeli conflict is going to
All the
dramatically
Syrian
affect them.
weapons. The
Oh yeah,
the after the Syrian government collapsed, right, and the Turkish-backed Al Qaeda seized the country, they grabbed all those weapons that Russia had provided, and they sold them to the United States, which the Biden administration in the last months, and then they sent them on to Ukraine. And these were, of course, Russian weapons. A lot of them older ones that the Kiev regime knew how to use. Actually, the most useful weapons for them. So that is one of the things that has maintained them. That was actually more significant, I think, than U.S. weapons that were surged by Biden. It was the Russia had to fight their own weapons that they had given Syria over the last few months, and that kept them alive, into the spring, right? But those are gone now as well. So bad situation.
do you think? Well, let me ask you this: What? Uh-oh, Mark, did I just lose you?
Nope,
Oh,
I'm here.
there we go. I thought the things went dark on me for a second. I'm like, uh-oh. Russia's relationship with China. Russia spoke with the President Xi, spoke with President Putin while this recent thing was going on. We got Iranians showing up in China. We got defense ministers, foreign ministers showing up in Moscow. What do you think's happening with this trio of people, all who have the U.S. empire's crosshairs on them right now?
Yeah, so we know that. I mean, Putin spoke to everyone while he was definitely behind the scenes trying to do what he could, condemning the Israeli and the U.S. attacks in the strongest possible terms, right? But doing more diplomatically, and of course, at a military intelligence level behind the scenes, we don't really know. But he spoke to Xi Jinping, right? He spoke to Pezeshkian. He spoke to Trump. He spoke to Netanyahu. He spoke to the leaders of the major Middle East countries on the back of all of this. He spent an hour and a half speaking to the Chinese leader. We know that. So there was definitely a lot going on there. And then, on the day that Iran replied to the U.S. attack, of course, the Iranian foreign minister Araghchi came to Moscow and spoke to Putin. We don't know what they said because there hasn't been any official transcript, but we do know that the Russian presidential spokesman Peskov was asked, and he's like, what can you do for Iran? And he basically said, well, that depends on what they ask for. What they ask for, it wasn't said. I mean, it was vague, but a lot of people are interpreting that. And I think there's something to that of saying, well, what they ask for, we'll try to give them. Right. That was, and I think there was a bit of frustration. Putin had let that out a few days earlier at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, where he said that Iran had been a very difficult country to help, that they had refused a joint air defense system, right? Where Russia had even offered them joint production in Iran of air defense interceptors, that they had offered to connect them to Russia's own powerful satellite, guided air defense, networks, and Iran prickly about their sovereignty, about not trusting Russia, not trusting anyone else. And also, definitely with Pezeshkian, evidently having some belief that they wanted to still try naively to improve relations, to placate the United States. That was dumb. And luckily, it didn't cost them their government at the end of the day. But I think now, in the aftermath of all of this, they will understand that there is no trusting or diplomacy with the beast, right? You can't. I mean, you can't trust anything they say, right? They'll go back on anything and everything. They'll do diplomacy and then conduct sneak attacks multiple times in the course of the same conflict in the past week or two. And I understand part of the certain political factions in Iran's reserves, right? There was a time in the mid 2000s, around 2010, when Russia was flirting with the same thing. They were trying to flirt with the West.
Yeah,
Medvedev was
yeah.
president. They let Libya fall, right? They agreed to a UN Security Council resolution, and there had been an air defense exchange where Iran had purchased S-300, older but formidable air defense networks, and Russia, trying to please the United States, had delayed that for years after it was agreed upon. And at the time, I remember condemning that. I mean, I remember
Me
speaking
too.
very loudly against Medvedev, against, when
Yep.
that was Medvedev before his Damascene conversion, and him becoming the fire, back when he was a neoliberal, pro Western, whatever. But Russia has changed a lot since then. And I think that perhaps the key to Iranian concerns about putting too much of their trust and defense in either Russia and China, or China, moving forward, is to always do it together, right? Everything should be Russia, China, and Iran. So there's that added, it's not just Russia, it's not just China, it's both at the same time. And Iran should be brought more fully. That Sino-Russian relationship, which is the single most important bilateral relationship in the world, hands down, the foundation, the building foundation of a multipolar world order. Putin, last week at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, also said that Russia and China are not creating a new world order, that they are simply formalizing a natural process that is inevitable as the sunrise. But Iran should be brought more fully into that to make it not just the bilateral relationship, but a true tripartite. And in the last 12 days, I think they've earned it. I mean,
Yeah.
they've suffered their blows. Hopefully they've had their last delusions shattered, right? That you can appease the beast, and they need to be brought more fully. And if it's always Russia, China, and Iran, maybe that will help assuage Iran's, historically, possibly, they've got something there, fears about putting too much trust in their sovereignty and their alliances with, any one partner. And then, maybe then it can be expanded further beyond those three. So, I mean, BRICS is not that. I want to make that very clear. BRICS is another thing. BRICS is the beginnings of a parallel system, but there's too many countries already in BRICS that have no desire whatsoever for a conflictual relationship with the United States. India, Brazil,
Brazil.
Saudi Arabia, others, Egypt, which is one of the biggest recipients of U.S. military aid, still. So there's a lot of people that put, I think, a lot of false assumptions. Now, those countries are putting themselves on the wrong side of the U.S. simply by seeking an economic alternative. So they may have those geopolitical hard choices down the road, whether they like it or not, simply because the U.S. won't accept what the BRICS are doing in the medium term, much less the long term. But this Russia, China, Iran, that is beyond just talk, right? That is actual military alliance. It needs to be. Where it is, it's valuable, and where it's not, it needs to be a real military alliance moving forward. I hope the Iranians can get past that prickliness now over that, and that they can learn that they need to trust Russia and China, and Russia and China also need to trust Iran.
Yeah, I think two things I'll end with, and that is, I noticed that in the discussion of this with like Russia, China, Iran, I heard the SCO, not BRICS.
Yep.
I heard
Yeah.
Shanghai Cooperation, not BRICS.
That is the meeting that is occurring right now in Beijing. Yesterday, I believe today as well, it's a defense ministers level meeting of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which includes more countries, of course, but it definitely also includes Russia, China, and Iran. And of course, if those three are meeting, you can be sure that they are talking about the aftermath. If again, it's not the end, it's just a skirmish, and now we enter another stage of preparation and military buildup before the next outbreak of violence in the Middle East, which is also as inevitable as the sunrise, I would say.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Mark. And yeah, I'll just say this: Iran got their nose snubbed a bit. They did some snubbing themselves, and they made some bad decisions in the past. But I got to say, they showed that they're willing to fight. They showed that they're not chumps, that they're not pushovers, that if you push them, they'll fight back. So I think they've earned some respect and from everybody. And collectively, people can look at them and say, well, you made some mistakes.
Yeah.
But when
you talked intelligence sharing before. What Iran needs from Russia and China more than anything is counterintelligence. They need to stop that Mossad penetration. That is the most important. That's where, and also the whole information battle space, the data sphere, digital sovereignty. Russia and China need to really help Iran in those categories.
Thank you. Don't forget, everybody, Mark Sleboda. And let me show you on the way out here, this is critical, that you go to Boosty. Take a look right here, boosty.to. This is Mark Sleboda's world, the real politique with Mark Sleboda, boosty.to. That's sanction proof. So if you want to be a part of the Sleboda sphere and subscribe and everything, feel free to. I recommend it. Share that on all your social. Go share Mark Sleboda's page on your X and Facebook and all that kind of stuff. Make sure you share this on all your social media platforms. Follow me on Rockfin, follow me on Rumble, follow me on Telegram, Instagram, Facebook, whatever. And if you can afford it, Patreon, buy me a coffee, PayPal, whatever. That's great. If not, just make sure you share this stuff. We're out.